8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Thanks everyone for joining us from all around the world. On behalf of Newchip, I'm excited to introduce Ian Garrett of Ideaship Fund. The goal of our Q&A today is to discuss the importance of intellectual property for startups and the challenges associated with building up a valuable patent portfolio. Ian and his colleagues at Ideaship enable startups to harvest, enhance, and maximize patent asset value and its impact on their enterprise. Welcome, Ian. I appreciate you taking the time. I would love for you to give any additional detail on what you guys focus on, and in particular, the focus on IP and your processes around that.
Thanks for the introduction, Kyle. It's my pleasure to be here, and I'm excited to get into the details. So, as you said, I work with Ideaship, which is a patent equity fund. We provide patent capital for early stage technology startups. And our general approach is that early stage is the optimal time to turn foundational ideas into patent assets. And we take a collaborative approach, leveraging subject matter experts, patent attorneys, and our internal resources to essentially form a brain trust for our investees, depending on their specific technology field. And we take them through patent strategy to patent prosecution and to eventually getting granted patent assets that have real value that will impact their eventual exit value, which is ultimately the goal of IP for a startup, beyond protecting your innovations and ensuring that you don't lose your competitive advantage. Historically, intellectual property has played a huge role in successful startups' exit values. And it's an area of focus that a lot of companies don't give a lot of thought to until it's too late. The way that the patent system works in the States and also abroad, there's a definite urgency to it. But early stage founders have so many other things they're focusing on, product, marketing, raising money, that it's easy to let IP slip through the cracks. And
Yep.
What we really try to do is support early stage founders and provide expertise so that they can focus on everything else that they're working on, and also make sure that they're having all their intellectual property needs correctly addressed.
Absolutely. Yeah, perfectly said. And I think it's going to be really fun to kind of dive into your experience. And obviously you work with a lot of different startups, hearing about where startups are successful and where they're not so successful. And so I know we're going to kind of tap into that in a little bit. But to get started, obviously we at Newchip work with a lot of different startups around all different types of industries, and they might not totally understand kind of the importance of intellectual property in the way that you guys see it in building up that valuable patent portfolio. So we obviously think it's important for them to at least understand why this matters. Why is this something that companies should be actively thinking about? And as you just mentioned earlier on, not just waiting, years, down the line when suddenly it becomes more top of mind. Why should they take a proactive approach in at least building a foundational knowledge around this kind of IP and patent topic?
Absolutely. So the first thing is intellectual property can really level the playing field for startups who have a high-tech focus. What we see a lot is in these industries that are fairly established is there are some really big patent players, and the way that their patent portfolios are built out, it makes it difficult as a newcomer to really break into the space without violating patents and committing patent infringement. So it's really important, if you want to break into a space that's competitive, you need to make sure that you're protecting the innovations that you believe will allow you to break into that space. So we always recommend people start thinking about it right out of the gate, and beyond the more big picture reasons behind that, there are some more tangible reasons for why it's important to get started early. In the United States, you have a 1-year window from when you publicly disclose your innovation to when you can actually file an application on that innovation. After that, you are no longer allowed to file for patent protection for that innovation. So that 1-year window is really critical. But of course, a lot of early stage startups, within a year of disclosing their innovation or really what they see as their main product focus and their main differentiators, 1 year isn't a very long time to go out and raise sufficient funds to actually support the development of an intellectual property strategy. So the 1-year window is a big reason for why you should start thinking about it early. And additionally, in the world of IP, the winner is the first to file, meaning that even if you're developing out an idea and you have the publicity behind it, if someone else files a patent for that idea before you do, none of that matters. If that patent is granted, then they will be the beneficiary of that technology. So being really strategic in the way that you disclose your innovation and the way that you're marketing things to make sure that you have your ducks in a row when it comes to IP before you expose yourself to potential copycats is very important.
Awesome.
So yeah, really, all in all, get started early. From a fundraising perspective, what we see is a lot of investors don't take a lot of stock in a company's patent value if all they have is a provisional, because it is to some extent sort of the bare minimum if they're a technology focused company, and it's sort of the expectation. So as far as differentiating yourself to fundraisers, having a really well thought out patent strategy is can be very beneficial from an optics perspective, beyond all of the associated patent value from that strategy.
Absolutely. Yeah, and from my fundraising experience, I mean, IP is a primary topic, and obviously when startups create and build out their data rooms, you will no doubt be asked by investors to provide any sort of kind of IP materials or patent materials. So that kind of moves me into my next question, which obviously you've worked with or met hundreds of different startups, and so you can have this really unique knowledge set when it comes to what successful companies do and then what not so successful companies do when it comes to IP. So, kind of where do startups go wrong? And not just kind of kicking the can down the road, but, is there any, what other pitfalls have you seen when it comes to IP?
Absolutely. So one of the most common pitfalls I see is a lack of understanding of what constitutes patent value. This number varies depending on who you ask, and a more conservative estimate is about 95% of granted patents have no value, in the sense that they're never monetized, they're never litigated against, and really it's just sort of something for people to say that they've done as far as developing a company. And what's interesting is that you as a founder, your innovation's better than anyone, and obviously you've taken a lot of risks to build out your vision for this, and so in your mind, your technology and your innovations are valuable, and they have a value, and that can very much be the case. But focusing on the specific components of your technology that, when patented, can actually create value is very important. So one common pitfall I see is people patenting the wrong things. People patenting because they think that the USPTO will grant their patent and then they'll be good to go. Whereas the reality is a lot of the time the patents that are easier to get through the USPTO are the ones that ultimately have no value. So really, the big mistake is not consulting people who have deep patent experience, not just working with the USPTO, but also in your specific technology area. The world of patenting is such that nobody knows the entire patent landscape because each technology is so differentiated and requires so much subject matter expertise. And what this sort of rolls into, you know, in the sense that you should really be consulting patent experts, is selecting the right patent counsel. And this is one that I see that companies struggle with and will often backfire. Is a lot of the times the typical flow for when you as a startup approach intellectual property or a patent lawyer is the ideas is that they'll sort of hear your ideas and then directly convert that into filings. They'll file, you'll get your patent issued there, and then they're happy because they were able to build the hours, and you're happy because you have a patent. But ultimately, they didn't directly contribute to the curation of your patent portfolio, and did it really help with the strategy behind that. And what I always like to see, and what I really think that all entrepreneurs who are really taking substantial risks and giving up a lot of opportunity costs to, as corny as it sounds, pursue their dream, you don't want to hamstring yourself by not seeking out the right experts. So what I like to see is for the relationship between a startup and their patent counsel to be more of a collaborative approach. And, the patent counsel has deep expertise in the specific technology area of the startup and has seen a lot of patents in that space go through, and they know what the market trends are, and they understand the developments from the USPTO criteria, and they leverage all of that understanding to work with the founders and say, hey, these are what you've identified as your valuable ideas, but given the technology area you're in and given the patent standards for this technology area, maybe we rethink this a little bit and we focus a little bit more here and we de-emphasize this component of it. How can we position this to maximize the return on our dollars spent for building out our patent strategy? So selecting the right patent counsel is a hugely important decision that early stage startups are faced, especially if they expect their patent portfolio to really be a significant contributor to their eventual enterprise value.
It might be difficult for some startups to identify whether they actually have any sort of patented, value, and whether, obviously you could patent, a specific technology, you can patent a process, so if I'm a founder and just saying, hey, I'm looking at my business, what can be patented and what cannot? Do you have any obviously they should be consulting with a kind of patent counsel, but do you have just any kind of maybe general thoughts or guidance there for a startup founder to just kind of do a self-evaluation on their own product and services play?
Yeah, so that is a difficult question. I think to some extent you can bootstrap your understanding of the patent landscape, but ultimately you'll never know what's really patentable until you talk to experts. And another sort of common pitfall that I see a lot for technology startups is they assume that their product can't be patented because it's in a certain space. So the one I hear the most often is for software companies. Oh, well, you can't patent an algorithm. And a lot of this relates back to the Alice decision, which did make it significantly more difficult for filers to secure patent protection for algorithmic-based processes and products. But the reality is that some of the most high-value patents in the entire patent world are for those specific products, algorithms and software. And this narrative, to some extent, creates a barrier of entry in people's minds of, oh, well, I'm doing software, there's nothing I can patent here. And the reality is if done correctly, most technology areas have patentable subject matter within it. And I really can't go too much into the specifics because I'm not a lawyer and I don't really and I can't speak to self-evaluating, but what I would say is that do not self-evaluate and conclude that it's not a possibility.
Absolutely. That's great advice. Yeah, absolutely. Because
Again,
I know we have a number of startups that you would never think that they have any sort of patent play, but they do, and kind of just goes to show you that, never close the door on exploring that as a potential value creator and driver.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And again, it's sort of, my recommendation falls back to talk to experts, but I really think that is so critical for founders to do. And it's also a difficult thing because as a founder, you've built out this technology and you're the most familiar with it. And to some extent, your logic is that, well, how will someone else really be able to weigh into this? They didn't build up the technology. But patent attorneys and consultants have made an entire industry on being able to really recognize areas of patent value for early stage companies.
Absolutely.
and for large tech companies as well. So I really think that consulting experts with a specific focus on experts who are in your specific technology domain is a really key step for any early stage company whose primary focus is on their technological innovations.
Absolutely. Now I know we only have a couple more minutes, but I kind of want to dive into a few more things. Is there anything from a global perspective that startups should be aware of? Are you seeing any changes in the regulatory landscape, or are you seeing things around the marketplace? When it comes to IP and patent plays, that should be just at the top of mind for these startups, or anything like that?
Yeah, so I think that's a great place to conclude on because real world examples speak louder than explanations, obviously. Yep. So, sort of the biggest case that I think about is ServiceNow, which was about 4 years ago, so it might not be in the forefront of everyone's mind, but as they were going through their funding rounds, early on there was questions around what they were doing from a technology perspective and the potential patent ramifications of that. And they had been on record sort of devaluing the importance of intellectual property, which is not an uncommon approach. With everything that startups focus on, it's easy to let that slip to the back burner, especially because, as I said, 95% of patents don't have any value. So it seems like a high risk area to focus on. So ServiceNow ended up sort of just ignoring their patent development strategy and continued business as usual, and were then hit with a patent infringement lawsuit from BMC that eventually led to ServiceNow having to pay out $270 million to BMC, and that was after it settled. So yeah, you think about
that's a good example.
And I think about the cost that it would have taken them to secure the best patent experts and build out the most robust patent strategy in the world, and it would have been drops in a bucket compared to what they eventually had to pay out. So I think really the ServiceNow example is a really good case study for what happens if the rest of your company is really successful, but you don't have that strong IP foundation. Because as you get bigger and as you have more success, the likelihood of other patent holders coming after you for patent infringement goes up astronomically.
You're a bigger target, absolutely.
When you're in your first couple rounds, and if you're ignoring patents, you might not have a patent infringement case brought to you, but you'll never know down the road when that might come up. And it's a much better approach to get an idea of what your patent portfolio needs to look like in order to protect you from these things, than to sort of kick the can and eventually pay quite a high price in the same way that ServiceNow does.
Absolutely. No, that's extremely well said.
And then to your comments around sort of what's next within the world of patents, a lot's going on right now. And that's actually a characteristic of the world of intellectual property in general, is it's IP is a system of rewards and controls, and striking that balance is something that the patent world has been trying to do since its conception. And it's always sort of going back and forth between more rewards versus more controls. And one example of that is around the effects that COVID's having on the patent world, and the fact that the USPTO recently passed an act that's going to accelerate prosecution of filed patents that are related to COVID. And I think this really goes to show that the patent space is a very reactive one, and it's one that if you're a patent professional, you need to really have your finger on the pulse, which is why it's really a lifelong pursuit. And again, why it's so important to consult with experts is because the landscape is always changing. You may have a solid understanding of what counts as patent eligible material one year, but in a few years, the landscape might look completely different. The patent landscape is being built right in front of us, and there's a lot of uncertainty on sort of how things are going to fall into place as far as restrictions and sort of the leniency around patentability. So really, it's important to be following what's happening right now if you're a technology-focused company. And again, I think that's a lot to ask from founders who already have so many different things on their plate that are so tangible and so obviously urgent. And so I think, again, if you think that a big part of your value comes from these novel technologies that you've developed, it's a very difficult thing to be successful in by yourself. So
absolutely,
I always encourage founders to seek expert advice.
Yep.
And take everything with a grain of salt, because it's such an ever-changing space. Nobody knows everything, but the more opinions that you can get and the more people that you can have weigh in on your specific situation, the better off you'll be in the long run as far as securing and protecting the value of your innovations.
Absolutely. And that's a great finishing point, Ian. I mean, this has been incredibly insightful. I know we have a number of Newchip companies that are patent protected or in the process of doing so, but hopefully some other ones that are not, maybe thinking to themselves, maybe we should at least learn more about this topic. And so I appreciate your time again, Ian Garrett with Ideaship Fund, very valuable partner of Newchip. Hope everyone enjoyed the conversation and have a great rest of your day. Take care.
Thank you so much, Kyle. Y'all have a good one.